Hi everybody, can you hear me? All right, so excited to see everybody here. If anyone's having trouble hearing me or getting the stream, please drop a line in the chat and let me know. Let me know. Oh, hi Leah, good to see you. Hi Stefan. Hi Wade. I know I just posted a funny selfie in your thread there. Nice to see you in the event. Hey Benji, good to see you as well. Well, today's conversation is about lurkers in our online communities, and I guess just by way of introduction of myself to get started, I started out working in online communities and collaboration spaces probably around 2000 when some of my first experiences with online communities was with old discussion forums. Whenever I worked with a company called Skodos Tech, and it was online multiplayer role-playing games, and we had a very active forum, and I was one of the storytellers within the space, and designed some of the games, and really just had a blast putting that together. And so one of the things that became quickly obvious to me, even in those very very early days, is that you've got a large number of people who are members of the forum, but there's only a really vocal minority that tend to talk about online, talk in the online forum kind of setting. So I'm particularly interested in lurkers, and I don't know, just a quick poll. How many of you are familiar with what's called the 90-9-1 rule? Has anybody heard of the 90-9-1 rule? So if you haven't run into it before, I'll assume that some people haven't. Cool, Stefan. The idea is that, and this has been accepted. I think there's research going back to about the year 2000. Which is that about 90% of the members of your online community are going to be lurkers in the background. They'll be what's sometimes called peripheral participants. So they maybe log in, they check into the platform, but they're not active. They're not actively posting things. They're not asking questions. They're not sharing information. They're not contributing in ways that we typically think about what contribution and activity means in online community spaces. So that's 90%. 9% of the participants in the community are what you might call casual contributors or occasional contributors. They'll jump in if they have something to say, but generally speaking, they're not really going to be very involved either on a day-to-day basis. And then you've got your 1%, which are those people that are usually the first ones in, posting on a thread all the time. They're asking questions, they're sharing information, very regularly. Hi, Pooja. And so they're your super users, your super active users. And a lot of times we're judging the success of our community based on really those last two groups, the occasional contributors and the super contributors who are out there. But those 90% represent a large majority of the people who are in your community. And so what I was hoping to talk about today, and this I think was in the description of what we put together for the talk today, was are all of these lurkers the same? Because they're not, and I think there's some ways to segment them out and think about who can contribute, who won't, who might never contribute, but then who could be converted into a participant, and sort of what are some of the tactics that have worked that I've seen, and I'd love to hear from some of you, how you've enticed some of your community members to come in and start actively participating as well. So I think maybe before I jump into some of the research that I've found around this and share some of my personal experiences, does anybody if you have any questions about an experience with getting lurkers to participate, or you've got an idea or something that you've tried to get lurkers to participate, why don't you post it in the comments, and I'll share it with the group. We can maybe respond to it and talk about it a little bit as well. What I will say is that the common wisdom that I've typically seen about lurkers is that lurkers don't really add a lot of value to communities, and that the only way to get them to be valuable is if you somehow turn them into contributors, people that actively give of their time and effort to post something within the community. Would you say that's true? I think from some of the research that I've come across, there are some ways that lurkers can contribute to a community, even though they're not posting questions or putting up photos or responding to other people within the community. And if you think about it, these individuals, if they're coming back to your community, if it's not an accident that they've found your community and signed up and then regretted it later, some of those individuals might really be able to be influencers outside of the community. They may be able to talk to other people who would also be interested in the community and share some of the things that they've learned in the community, as well as maybe invite new people into the community. So there's value outside of those individuals actively contributing. Wade Saxton says, all the time, I actively pull them out into a conversation to get them to engage. If they decide to engage, we continue to engage them. If they don't, we leave them alone. They are happy, we are happy. Yeah, I think that's a great way to take a look at it. And I think it's a pretty commonly held wisdom within online community management practices. When somebody joins your community for the first time, it's a nice idea to maybe either you as the community manager reach out to them and welcome them, and hopefully give them an opportunity to talk about what they care about or what they're interested in. If they respond, that's great. If they don't, that's okay too. But then to kind of direct them into the sorts of activities that you want them to perform in the community, like filling out their personal profile so that others can find them and see how special and neat they are, or else get them to post in a welcome thread and introduce themselves, or better, and this is something that I learned from Richard Millington in the world of Feverbee. If you guys aren't familiar with him, he does some really great stuff. Don't ask people to introduce themselves. That's like asking them to come into a party full of strangers and tell about what they are. And I think we as community managers are used to being pretty outgoing and gregarious and say who we are, in a group full of strangers. But for most people, that's a tough social barrier to get over. It might be easier to engage them with a question like, hey, what is it that you're working on this week, or what kind of problems are you currently facing, or what kind of ideas are you looking for? Really kind of engaging them with something that's immediate and that is going to give them value right now, rather than asking them to kind of give their LinkedIn resume to begin with. So maybe that's kind of one idea to maybe kind of get them to start to engage or to think about engaging in some ways. Nicolette asks, is it worth tagging lurkers in posts to try to get them to engage, or do we just let them do their thing? I think it's worth trying, and again, sort of that community management 101 approach when you have newcomers into the community, to greet them in some way. You either have the opportunity to greet them in front of the stage or behind the curtain. So you can certainly do a welcome post on a daily or weekly basis, welcoming newcomers into the community, mentioning them, so that they know that they're welcome there and they've been seen, and that you hope that they will respond and participate. Or you could approach them behind the scenes, and which is a little less putting somebody on the spot. Depends on the kind of community you're running, I guess, and the tone that you're trying to set. But you could approach them behind the scenes and welcome them and ask what kind of things they're looking for. You can maybe then use that as an opportunity to direct them to other people with similar interests in the community. And that does raise kind of a key point. I don't know how many of you do this, but it's worth spending some time as you are building a community, especially if you're building a community from scratch, to start assembling a list of some of your people in the community as you've met them and had a chance to talk to them. I'll often do this in just a simple spreadsheet. List the person, maybe their profile link, and then what I talk to them about, or sort of like what their interest is, if they have some interest areas and other things. Because as you start to accumulate that list, and this is the hard work of community management, winning new people into the community one at a time. It's really about helping them to see the value of joining the community. And helping them to see other people that have similar kinds of interests. So as that list grows and you start to see similarities between members, that gives you a chance to introduce them to each other, maybe in a public post about a topic that's of interest to them, and to get them going. Pooja says, I love the idea of introducing members to others who have similar interests or something in common. Great idea. Yeah, thanks. Like I said, I can't take credit for some of that. A lot of those ideas will come from Richard Millington. He's done some really great work. If you're not familiar with his books, he's got a couple out. I still love his first one, which is Buzzing Communities, which has been around since about 2012. He's got some really super ideas in there, and good insights about the business of building out communities from scratch. I know for me, I started working very specifically in the community space in the early 2010s, actually building out communities for customers. And I've probably built out dozens of them by now, in a variety of different kinds of platforms. But one of the things that struck me when I started working with Richard directly, because I worked for Feverbee for a couple of years, was that he really had a sense of what is the psychology and the sociology behind getting people to join communities, and I'll always love him for that, and the work that he did in that space. But it is a matter of the hard work of reaching out to 5-10 people a day directly, getting them into the community, welcoming them to the community, asking questions to kind of get them active and engaging pretty regularly. So I just did a little bit of brainstorming about some different types of community members, and I was just kind of writing down a couple of notes as we go. I have to write things down, or I always forget to remember them. But I profiled out a couple of different types of lurkers that I could think of. Maybe you guys can think of some others. I don't have all the answers, here with these things, but I think these are some different types that are worth thinking about. So one type of lurker I called the remorseful joiner. This is somebody who came on board. They were initially excited about the community, but it wasn't quite what they thought. Either they didn't read what the community was about, or they misunderstood, or you did an awful job of saying who the community is for, and who would get the most out of joining it. Maybe it's some combination of the two. But for whatever reason, they did decide to stick around. They just maybe don't come back very often. They don't engage very much. This is somebody who's probably never going to be much of a contributor, but maybe they'll get some value out of being in the community for some time. And I think what you'll find with some of these profiles that I just kind of put together and imagine based on some personal experiences and things that I've known, is you've got really two camps of lurkers. There are the lurkers who can be engaged, who you may be able to draw out into participation, and then there are those who we will never engage, and they either aren't joiners, or they don't really want to participate on a regular basis. So it's always a question. So that's the remorseful joiners. There's also what I call the looky-loos. These are people who just wanted to see what the community is all about, but they're really not part of your core inclusion profile for the community. Maybe they're just curious. But maybe they had no intention of ever returning. This can happen when you've got a very low barrier of entry for your platform, which isn't usually a bad thing, but in this kind of case it is. There's no time being sunk into joining the community platform, so their level of commitment starts out pretty low. You might entice them to stick around, but the chances, again, of these individuals ever contributing seems to be pretty low to me. Then you've got your reticent lurkers, or your shy lurkers. These guys belong in your community. They like what it's about, and they feel that they belong here, so they've identified with it in some way. And there's been pretty good research to show that. The people that keep coming back with community, they've identified in some way with the community, even to the extent that some of the research, but going back to about 2000, has shown that your lurkers who join communities and identify with it will even identify people as friends who they've never connected with or had any meaningful interaction with. They've just read their posts or questions or things every day, and they actually feel like they know these people and they identify them as friends. It's just the way that they're socializing. These shy lurkers are people who might well become contributors. Like Wade said, you reach out to them, maybe these are ones who are going to actively participate. All they need is a proper welcome. They need a feeling of safety. In other words, their responses are going to be welcomed, and just some encouragement to share their ideas. And so it becomes a question of what can you do to encourage these individuals more? This sometimes happens even with individuals who joined a community a long time ago. They've been content to just kind of read posts and tell me if you've ever experienced this. They're content to just read posts, but suddenly they see a post one day and it was exactly what they cared about. It was exactly what was really on their minds about that community's topic. And often they'll say, "Oh, I'm a longtime lurker. This is my first post," or "I'm decloaking. I've been out here lurking around, but I just had to jump in and talk about this." Sometimes it's just a matter of finding the right trigger kind of topic, for them to look at. And this can be something to pay attention to, because I think a lot of times most of the time discussions are driven in the community by your frequent posters, and they sort of set the agenda, things that are of interest. So it's worth maybe even taking some time to try to do some low intensity sorts of polls or questions in the community about topics. Like, hey, vote on these topics. What's interesting to you? Maybe kind of watch where the traffic of your community is going, like what questions seem to be getting the most views as opposed to the most comments, because there may be a difference there. The danger of always going with your top contributors, that top 1%, is that they're going to skew your understanding of what the interest is in the community. You may have 90% of your community members interested in very different things than the 1% that are really driving the discussion at any given moment or time. So just some things to maybe start thinking about, for you on that. Then there are the happy little lurkers who just never they belong to your community, but they just simply never post, or hardly ever. And so these are folks you might trick into posting once or twice. They may log in every day just to find out what's happening, but they're not going to ask questions or post pictures or do much of anything but read the posts. You might get from these individuals likes or shares if they think something is really interesting. And then finally, and this one came out in some research. There's a piece that just came out in June of this year from Joyce. I'm going to get their names really terribly. Joyce Yihui Lee, Zhongheng Wang, and Nikki Pantelli wrote an article called "Centrality or Decentrality: Hidden Influences for Sustaining Online Communities." It just came out in June of this year. You can probably find it up on ResearchGate if any of you are members out there. It's just a fairly short research piece that they put out, but this particular group of lurkers are highly influential. You may have members of your community who are experts in their field, and I think the qualitative research that they did on this was for a car care community. And so you had these people they're members of the community, they read, they log in pretty regularly, but they're experts and they don't have any time to really regularly post, but they kind of want to keep abreast of what's going on in the community or the platform. And what would happen is we'd be going along, it'd be a situation similar to what I described a little bit before, which is you're just waiting for the right trigger question for them to jump in and want to respond to something. Well, these individuals, when they do post, they can post something highly influential that can drive a lot of interactions from others because they're experts on it. There was a smoking cessation community, so how to quit smoking kind of community that I consulted with and was active with some years ago. And one of their community members like this was a doctor from the Mayo Clinic. And he would occasionally blog, but he would also occasionally jump into the platform and interact and answer questions from individuals who were in the space. So I think especially as you're identifying members of your community, it's worth taking some time looking through your list of lurkers and their profiles and seeing if any of them might be high influencers and reaching out and connecting with them. It might even require tracking them down, with an email or a phone call, if your community is conducive to that, if it wouldn't be seen as too intrusive, to reach out to those individuals and work with them. I do a lot of work in communities of practice, and so this is not an uncommon situation at all. If you get somebody that is a real expert in their field, and you can get them to contribute or do a live stream, or a Zoom meeting or whatever, and pull that into the community, it can be a real driver of interaction within that space. So, here's the reference on. I mentioned earlier that lurkers may identify with the community, even saying members are friends, even though they've never interacted. That's a piece of research that goes back to 2000 by Nancy Baym, B-A-Y-M. So if that's something you'd like to take a look at. I cite academic research in the work that I do because I think it's really important that I do consulting and strategy in communities for a lot of different organizations, and when I'm working with an organization, I don't want to just base my advice on my personal experiences and things that I've learned, and I don't want to just base it on sort of the popular business realm think tanks, like a Gartner or some of those groups, or even like Community Roundtable would be an example of a research outlet for online communities. I don't know if you guys are aware of that either. Community Roundtable publishes some really helpful research about the state of online communities. It's a report called the State of Community Management report. Every year, going back 10 or more years now, and they talk about the return on investment of communities, how communities get to value, what percentage of communities tend to be active contributors versus lurkers, and their numbers are a little different than the 99 and 1 rule that's out there. And it varies whether you're talking about an externally facing community or an internal, type of community, like a digital workplace, or an internals like a social intranet, if you want to think about it in those terms. So I like to base it on my own experiences and certainly on some industry best practices like a Community Roundtable or Feverbee or CMX. Any of those guys, have some good things to say. But there's also a huge body of knowledge around academic study of online and virtual communities that's out there that I think is underutilized. And I think what initially turned me on to that space was who I mentioned a little earlier, Rich Millington with Feverbee. His initial book, Buzzing Communities, is based on a lot of academic research that was out there. But there's ongoing new stuff that's coming out all the time, and particularly some things around lurkers, within communities too. So one of the pieces that really kind of stood out for me that I wanted to mention to you guys is, if I can find it, I'll find it anyways. Here it is. So this is a piece that just came out also in 2020 by Kokotis, Lapis, and Ransbotham. It's called From Lurkers to Workers. It appeared in Information Systems Research. So if you're interested in this, these guys did a really interesting study. I'll be happy to share the research links when this gets posted up live. This thing is really cool. They looked at a long-standing community for diabetes support, so people with diabetes, going into this online community to support each other. And they looked at this particular community because the technology platform hadn't changed much in about 10 years. And they wanted to see what that process was of like the states that people go to from being sometimes called the readers to leaders framework. The idea of people coming in as a lurker initially in the community and then progressing through greater and greater involvement to being a leader, within whatever that network happens to be. So these guys went into it and they took a little bit of a different take, thinking about lurkers as being a couple of different states. And so, and these states are based on the level of confidence that somebody has, in there. And so it ranges from lurkers who cannot be engaged, to lurkers who can be engaged, to low confidence contributors, to higher confidence contributors. And they applied this research to this online community, looked at posts over a period of years. So there's a large data set that they looked at. And then they took the further step of validating that data against 5 other large communities that existed on Reddit at the time. So this is all pretty recent research which has just come out. I'm sure it's going to be revalidated by other researchers and looked at. But I think what stood out here was that we can't think of these states as being forever states necessarily. A lurker who cannot be engaged, they're probably never going to be engaged. But a lurker who can be engaged could move between other states. They could become a lurker that's no longer going to engage. Period. Maybe they get turned off by something, or they're just not finding it valuable. Or they could become a low confidence contributor, which would be the next step up. So, and how they're defining these differences was really interesting. In their research, they looked at 4 different kinds of contribution states. One is asking a question, which is a very high confidence kind of contribution. Another is sharing information, so sharing a link, sharing a photo, sharing some kind of original content. Responding, so that would be being a first responder to a thread or conversation. And then appending, which is the lowest level of confidence, that's contributing to an ongoing conversation. So maybe adding a comment to something that somebody said. And so what they were able to do was to assign some more specific kinds of percentages to those different kinds of activities within these spaces. So they were able to look at sort of an initial state, somebody just joined and registered for a community. The chances that they would become a lurker right off the bat is about 66%. So in other words, that they're just going to go into a lurking state. The chances that they might actually ask a question is about 1%. Really interesting stuff. And then, and I think sort of, validating to some degree the 99-1 rule. What they found is the lurkers who cannot be engaged in communities tends to be around 79% of the people that go into a community for the first time. They're just never going to contribute. Now, I think that's data that's still going to be validated, but it's super interesting that I think the things that we've felt have been true since about 2000 and in some of that research are being borne out in some more quantitative, kind of research right now. Nicole asks, do you think creating more community rituals and repetitive events could help to mitigate the number of lurkers in communities? Sure, why not? I think that repetition and kind of helping users to know when is a great time to log in and participate in something is a big help. The community that I mentioned a little earlier that I worked with some time ago for people who wanted to quit smoking, they had been around long enough. I think they had been started in 2009. I think they were begun, and they had gone through a couple of different platform changes. But one of the things that really emerged as a practice that got people involved, and of course healthcare communities are high involvement, kinds of platforms, was a repeated set of rituals. They did something that was called the Freedom Train, which was a daily check-in where people would, basically put up a cheerful message to support other people in the community who were trying to quit smoking. They also did something called the bonfire, which I think was an occasional, maybe once a quarter kind of activity, and that was really talking about people would do an off-the-cuff calculation about how many packs of cigarettes they would have smoked a month and how long they've been quit and how many packs of cigarettes they've in effect, quote, thrown on the bonfire. And it was a celebratory event within the community. So people came in and they partook of it and they felt more a part of the group. And so even those lurkers who came in and didn't actively participate, they would still come in for some of those events and be active. So Kathy asks another question. What's your opinion about likes? Some communities don't like them. Do you think that likes encourage a member to have a base interaction or just make passive interaction easier? Well, that's interesting. So the early, some of the early conversations, there's an article from back in around 2006 that was published by Jacob Nielsen. If you guys are familiar with Nielsen, and not Nielsen like me, but Nielsen, Nielsen. Jacob Nielsen is a world-renowned usability expert and kind of talks about good web design and things like that. And he talks a lot about the 99-1 rule for participation inequality in social media and online communities. One of the things he talks about is ways to mitigate that lack of responsiveness is to either make it easier to contribute or make participation a side effect. And so what he means by this, like with easier to contribute, make it easier to like something, make it easier to share something. I think that's a tack that a lot of social media platforms take, and it may have degrees of effectiveness. I haven't seen any research to show that people who start to like and share more are more likely to jump in and comment on something. But I think it is one track to do that. It's another. It's one of those engagement strategies that I think is on a continuum of being less to more prominent in a community. If you think about gamification strategies, liking is kind of a gamification strategy to just show popularity or upvoting or downvoting, like in a Reddit kind of post. And gamification with points, badges, and leaderboards, those kinds of approaches are another way to think about engaging people within the community. I think you need to be careful about the tone of your community when you're implementing any of those kinds of features or functionality, because it can actually create the opposite effect that you want. I've seen people react very badly to gamification strategies, as in, what is this badge for? Why the hell are you doing that? Why would I want this badge that tells me that I liked 3 things? So not only do you need to be judicious about the tone of the community, but even the kinds of virtual rewards or badges that you're providing, they should represent something. They should be something that means something to those in the community. So Leah is asked. Leah, I'll get to your question in a second. The other thing that Nielsen had mentioned was making participation a side effect. And this was kind of interesting too. So he talks about it as an example of Amazon's tendency to say people who bought this book also bought these other books. So recommendations being a side effect of people buying books. So finding some ways to show the popularity of content, not necessarily based on the number of likes or comments that a discussion thread or a post or piece of content has gotten, but on how much viewing it's actually getting, and maybe showing similar kinds of content to users who liked that particular kind of piece. Nielsen in the article says that Will Hill coined the term readware for this kind of effect. So the simple activity of reading or using something will wear it down and thus leaves its marks. We could tell something like this with Google Analytics to see how many views there are on a page, but depending on the kind of community platform that you're in or using, that might be tougher to get at some of that information. But again, it's another strategy. So I think I think you're onto something there, Kathy. I'm really intrigued by that idea of sort of like including likes in a community or not. Or even now where we have, sort of emotional reactions to things. Like in Facebook, people are now accustomed to not only being able to like something, but being able to do a heart, a wow, an angry post or something like that. To what extent are these things deepening engagement? Or are they really just kind of pointing to sentiment around topics, or even manipulating sentiment around topics? Interesting stuff. So Leah says, I've always felt it's important to make the community feel like a special or exclusive thing. What is the best way to portray that? I agree with you, Leah. I think communities are very different than a social media platform. I think community is used very loosely in a lot of cases. When I'm consulting with customers, I have a slide that I usually share with them where I kind of show the difference between a website at one end of the scale to a social media platform at the other end of the scale. And communities are really somewhere in between. The website is completely controlled by you and your editorial team, and social media is controlled by everybody. I mean, it's the open party that never ends. Facebook goes on forever. Anybody can join. Anybody can contribute anything that they want to. There may be communities that form within Facebook. Maybe you think about them as neighborhoods. And we could talk about Facebook or LinkedIn or YouTube as a kind of a global community, but that means something very different than I think what we're in. Online communities, especially the more kinds of private communities like what we would see with Disciple or any of the many other platforms that are out there for virtual community building, they need to have some rules about who belongs in the community and who doesn't belong in the community. These things need to be signaled in your landing page that talks about the community, talking about who's it for, why should I join, what am I going to get out of it, what other kinds of people are here, what kinds of things happen day to day. Like the more you can communicate accurately about what's going on in the community, the better. In some cases, I know I've had conversations with Richard about this in the past. He was a proponent for saying, it'd be great if you had a community platform where you could join it and then you could actually see everything that's going on. But maybe after your first or second contribution, then it prompts you to join the community. Well, community platforms don't work that way. And in most cases today, you have to register before you can even see what's going on in the community. However, I am a fan of, if it's possible, if there's the right APIs or hooks into the platform itself, to be able to surface publicly some of the ongoing conversations that are going on in the community. Because if you can show people directly what kinds of things are being said in the community, they can maybe formulate a better idea of, is this a place for me? Is this a place where I belong and need to go? But as far as the members are signaling to the people that belong in the community or not, when you're coming up with a community concept, when you're thinking about that community, you need to think about the criteria of the people who are going to join. And it's not just the demographics of who they are, but the psychographics, what they care about, what their habits are, what they need, what they want. And so a lot of my consulting engagements are involved with doing either focus groups or one-on-one qualitative interviews with potential members of those communities, and even communities that are in motion and have been for some time but have had trouble getting engagement. I'm often brought in to run some of the interviewing processes and talk to 15, 20 people in that community or who are prospective members of that community and find out what they care about. Do you belong to any other kinds of communities that are like this? Well, what works for you or doesn't work for you about them? Would you belong to another community, or why aren't you, actively contributing now? Just sort of digging into some of that. And And I think, generally speaking, the most successful communities have at least a couple of criteria that specifically identify somebody, who belongs in the community versus somebody who doesn't. So, a community for people who live in Wisconsin who are entrepreneurs, 2 criteria for coming in. Firefighters who happen to be women, 2 criteria. Park rangers who are based in the Western United States. Again, sort of what are the reasons for somebody to be in there? Because the more specific your criteria, the easier it's going to be to start to build that audience and help them see the upside of why they would want to be in there and why they would want to participate. So anyways, I've been talking a lot here, guys. Are there other kinds of questions or other kinds of other kinds of experiences you've had with trying to engage lurkers, or do you have any kinds of tactics that you've used that you feel have worked pretty well? I think just a couple of other things. Especially. I don't know that you're ever going to have a lurker who posts who's necessarily going to become a regular poster. It's not an easy thing to get people to change their behaviors in such a profound kind of way. But one of the things that I will say that if you're not doing these already, to make sure you try to do is, if that person has finally gotten over the social anxiety of posting for the first time in the community, the best thing you can do is to respond to it within the first couple of hours that it's gone up. Ideally right away if you see it, but I don't think any one of us wants to work 24/7 on our communities. But you've got about 24 hours to respond, and I think the research has generally shown that after 24 hours, the likelihood that person is ever going to return and post again drops precipitously. So you definitely want to do that. Nicolette asks, what's your advice for members who started out super active but then quieted down over time? So they were initially highly engaged, however, now only view content and lurk. You know what? This is going to happen. I mean, I think that the piece of research that I mentioned, the From Lurkers to Workers piece, they talk about these as being sort of confidence states, but I think it's more than just confidence. You go from initial to lurker to low confidence to high confidence. They're either, they might get bored. Maybe their interests have changed. Maybe their priorities have changed. Maybe they found another community that trips their trigger better. A lot of different reasons why people could just end up changing. I think it's just the natural evolution of communities over time. Your initial group of founding members and whoever your super users are who emerge out of that are probably going to get tired over time. And this is something, and again, I'll come back to the example community I've been talking about, the smoking cessation community. The people who were actively volunteering their time as community managers, because they were actually not under formal community management for a long time, but just volunteers who were coming in. Those guys burned out, and many of them would just kind of fall away over time because that whole continuous need to greet newcomers, even if they were signing into the community at 2 a.m, because that's when they're having a nicotine craving and they're looking for some help and support. That really that really kind of leads to some burnout. So it's a matter of continuing to have an influx of new people who are coming into the community. So it's not just nurturing the people who are in your community, but also doing a good job of promoting your community externally, on your social media sources, on your email newsletters, in your live events. I think these things are incredibly important. New people will discover your community, and if it's a compelling community example, and there's good content that's there for them to respond to, the idea is they're going to layer on over time. You will have a few people who will hang on over a period of years, who are just your super users who are always going to be contributing really hard. And again, I think for all of your mental health, because this is incredibly important too, so that you don't get burnt out, you need to be continuously looking at some of those high intensity contributors to see if some of them are willing to be ambassadors for you and for the community. So reaching out to them, asking them, hey, would you mind just, I see you're already really active, and I love that you're doing that. Would you mind maybe greeting some newcomers when they come in, or maybe once a week agreeing to kind of just post out a question, for a while? I'm not asking you to do this forever, but I think it'll really help to build this community and what we think it can be, and you're a big part of that. Help them understand that they're a part of it, and they can help shape what that community looks like over time. Having a strong super user or ambassador program is key to keeping you from burning out and to scaling up those kinds of community activities. And I know I've departed a field from the conversation about lurkers, but part of it is sort of engaging some of those lurkers. Yeah, exactly, Wade. Maybe some of them are bored, maybe not. All right, so I see I'm kind of running towards the end of time here, but I really enjoyed the questions from you guys, and I think what I'll do as a follow-up to this is I'll post out links to some of the articles that I brought up, because I think it's good reading for us all to be aware of. The research on online communities continues, and there's some really interesting stuff going on in psychology and sociology right now around these pieces. So thanks for joining, and I will be out in the community. If you've got questions, please contact me. I invite you to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm on most of the social media platforms, so pretty easy to find, and would love to talk to you one-on-one if you've got a community situation that you're working through right now. I'd be happy to support you. All right, thanks everybody.